So if you are in academia or you plan on going into academia, you may be a master's student considering publishing your dissertation or going into a PhD, or you may be a PhD student just interested in academic publishing. The first and most important thing to know is that journals are not made equal. So you don't just try to publish your work anywhere, anyhow, but you actually need to be very careful and strategic about where you place your work, because this is going to affect how valuable you're going to be in the future in terms of being able to be part of academia if those are your ambitions. Sometimes you may also just be interested in publishing because it's just good for you to be able to demonstrate that you can function at such a level, whether or not you stay in academia. I do know quite a few people who have actually gone on to join very lucrative industries at the back of the publications that they made during their PhD. They never published anything since, but this was enough of a stepping stone to get them where they needed to be. So, welcome everyone. Molweni, siyathabula. Thank you so much, guys. So, let's rock and roll. I'm gonna get right to it and let's see how far we are going to go. So tonight's live is going to be me talking about my academic publishing process from beginning to end. And I'm going to look at this in three main parts. So the first part is that you do need to warm up your system in terms of having a pipeline that you are going to publish. And I'm going to tell you my own story about how I warmed up my system in order to be able to have a healthy pipeline of publications. The second issue is that you also do need to have that pipeline. So, how do you manage that pipeline? That's something that I'm going to also explain. And then after that, I'm going to take you through the process, like a very specific example of what I do to go through the process of getting work published. So, in terms of system warm up, many of us will start in more or less the same place. Maybe you are doing a master's dissertation and you already think, you know what, I think I could enjoy a life of torturing myself to death by doing academic writing and going through multiple rejections before I get something published. Or it could be that you are doing your PhD and you're thinking that it's going to be nice for you to be able to publish that work. In my case, my journey with publishing actually started during my master's. So when I was doing my MSc, it was a 2 year research based master's. So we did the first year of modules and then we had a second year where we had a dedicated research project. As part of one of my assignments in that first year, I remember that I wrote an assignment where I reviewed the literature on inventory policies that are used in humanitarian logistics. And one of the main criticisms that I had looking at that literature was that they seem to overlook the role of host governments in how they can affect your inventory decisions. So, for example, I can pick the ideal location, I can work out the exact demand, but then if a government is going to come and raid a warehouse and take everything that is in there, that is going to have an impact on my supply chain. Or if a government decides that you can only have these types of goods or not that, or have things that only have a certain shelf life, all these dynamics are going to affect your inventory forecasting decisions. So that whole assignment was just based on the premise, like, let's look at host governments and let's look at how they might impact the way in which you are going to make decisions related to inventories, because once you impose that in the system, you're going to see how highly uncertain it is and how much more advanced planning you need to make. That assignment was well received from the people who were the conveners of that module. And then a decision was made that we should try to submit it to a journal. It was a good literature review. And it so happened during that time that there was a special issue call in one of the top journals in our discipline for humanitarian operations. We sent it in. It didn't even go out for review. It was a desk reject. And the main message coming out of it was that, yeah, the idea that governments can have an impact is one that's interesting. We do have an inkling from practice that this does happen, but it's not going to be enough for us to rely on you just telling us what these governments do. You're going to need more data and you're going to need to be able to evidence that there's an actual impact. So at that time, it became clear that it was going to be a stumbling block. If I didn't have the data, I wasn't going to be able to publish. So the next step that happened was that when I crossed over into the second year and I could work on my dissertation, I actually went out to collect data. So I conducted research trying to understand from a specific humanitarian organization how they were working in 6 different countries. Those countries were carefully selected based on various parameters. So I was very interested in complex emergency settings. I looked at conflicts, I looked at political crises, and I tried to understand how governments played a role in that. So with the data in place, this thesis performed extremely well. It won a national award at the time. So this was in the Netherlands, and it looked like a very promising piece of work. So when it was done and it showed such great promise, when I crossed over to my PhD, this particular piece of research became the first empirical chapter in my PhD. So I spent some time developing it, and we submitted it to the topmost journal in my discipline, so you cannot go higher than that journal. And then after the first round, they said, oh, it's nice, you have amazing data, but you have no theory. This is not going to fly without any theory. So we took it back, we did more work on it, and then after a few rounds, it met the requirements and it got published. So my first publication became a top journal publication. But if I would give you the timeline for how long it took from the time that I had this specific idea that started off from an assignment during my MSc to the time that it is accepted in a journal, it was a journey of more than 4 years. So, one of the things that I think is always important for people to realize is that to be able to publish in top journals, you are going to need to put in a lot of work. And there are risks associated with it, but you can be more strategic in terms of how you do things so that you maximize your chances in terms of being able to hit top. So, in my case, it was the fact that I started off somewhere. I had a desk reject because I didn't have enough data, but I was able to glean from the report that I got back from the editors what was important and what would have been interesting for them in order for these piece of work to be considered for publication. So in the next iteration, I went back into the literature and I did a lot of reading, and I was able to then really pinpoint what the key issues were, and I was able to show what the specific contribution of my work was. There was still a weakness in the sense that I had not thought about theory, because I had said, oh, I'm theory building, so I don't need to worry about that. And then it turned out that for this particular journal, it doesn't fly to just say, because this is new and it's exploratory and I am theory building, therefore I'm not going to engage with any of the existing theories. So that also became a learning curve, and I was lucky enough that I was given the opportunity to revisit that and to actually strengthen the writing in that regard. And then this became a top publication. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking about, okay, I want to hit a top journal, you have to understand how it works in your field. So for my particular discipline, it's a really long process. It was 5 years from the initial idea to the time that this is accepted as a manuscript. And there were 3 major iterations that were involved. One where I just did a literature review without the data. The second one where I had the data, but I didn't have a theoretical anchor. And then the third one where I actually integrated the theory and I was able to show concretely what the theoretical and practical contribution was going to be. Since that time, I have learned a lot. So now I always make sure that one of the things that I'm going to do first, if I'm starting to work on a project, is to first of all establish what is the relationship between this piece of work that I'm going to do and existing theory. So it's always one of the earlier questions that I try to address when I'm embarking on a particular research project. Am I just going to test a theory? Will I elaborate one? Or do I want to build an entirely new one? And by entirely new, I would put that in quotes, because I think my experience has been that always, even if the work that you're doing is truly novel, there's going to be some piece of work that comes at least remotely close to what you're doing. And then this means that if you want to publish in top journals, you are always necessarily going to have to engage with theory. And you're going to always have to find the theories that come closest to the things that you are interested in order to be able to publish or to get your work accepted. So theories in academic research are really about explanations. What sort of new explanations are you bringing for some well-established phenomenon or underexplored phenomenon. Because if you're not able to show what you are able to explain as a result of your work, then most times it becomes a reason for rejection in the top journals. You also have to make sure that you understand what the data expectations are. And these also vary a lot. And sometimes they can even be down to the reviewers that are going to look at your work. I remember that there was a time I reviewed an article and the authors had something like 60 plus interviews that they were able to collect. The article was still very weak on the theoretical bit, but I spent some time to compliment the authors to say it's amazing that you were able to conduct this many interviews in this particular context. But another reviewer looking at exactly the same piece of paper came back with the feedback that they had not conducted enough interviews. So they felt that 60 plus was not enough. And so you have to understand that sometimes things will be down to chance, but if you have a good editor, usually they will resolve this contradiction for you easily. They might tell you that no, we think 60 is fine, you don't need to go and conduct more interviews. Or they might say that we agree with the person that who says you don't have enough. At least if you can get this type of data, then it's going to help you a lot. So when you know the data expectations, you know the theory expectations, the next two most important things to secure are also rigor. So how rigorous is your work going to be? It's not enough to say, I have this data, but how are you able to go into it in order to get in-depth insights on a particular phenomenon? So the depth of insight is always much more important than the breadth of insight. So if you're doing the type of research where you're just listing things, you are identifying specific factors, this will be good. It's usually useful, especially at the conceptual stages of a particular theory or concept, but it's usually not enough for you to be able to publish in top journals. In top journals, they want insights that go deeper than anyone else has been able to before. And there are going to be some things that are usually surprising, or if they're not surprising, at least it's the first bit of empirical or concrete evidence that we have for a particular idea that has lingered for a long time but went on unresolved or unconfirmed. And then finally, it has to be transparent. So one of the most important things that we would usually be preoccupied with in academic research is replicability. If I were to present my method section to someone and I were to present, let's say, appendices of the ways that I coded my data, can they take the same bit of work and will they be able to try to replicate my results if they had access to the same data set, for example? So transparency in terms of how you arrive at your results is another very important factor if you want to hit the top journals. If you're not able to secure these four things, then it's usually going to be really difficult to hit the top journals. So make sure that you have this understanding upfront. And if you have not collected data already, then I would advise you to already check what the expectations are within your particular discipline, what other people who work in similar areas have been able to do, because I think also in general there will be a difference in expectations in terms of novel new things versus more well-established things. The bar for how much data you have is usually a bit lower for the more exploratory newer topics, whereas if they are more well-established topics, the bar might be higher. You have to do more. Sometimes it's also down to the context, so access to some context is incredibly difficult. So even if you are able to get 15 or 20 interviews, you might be able to get published in a top journal because you have gone much, much further than anyone else has before. So you have to really understand these intricacies. There's no written rule, there's no magic number, there's no standard number. There are going to be a lot of contingency factors. And this is where this takes me to another part when it comes to publishing in top journals. Who are your collaborators and how well do they understand the research landscape that you are trying to navigate? So for me, it already started during this master's where I had experienced supervisors who were able to say, there's something interesting here, let's try to see if it's going to be worth something. And they were able to say, these are the important journals where it's worth considering trying to put that work out. And then when it came back desk rejected, they saw an opportunity because I hadn't done my dissertation yet. So we could think about how we could collect data, what kind of data we could collect, how we set up the research design so that it would be something that at least meets the bar to go even higher. So where we were desk rejected was a really good journal, but where my first paper ended up getting published was an extremely good journal. So that rejection was a mere redirect. We were able to work on it and we were able to do different things. So for me, this is the story of how I was able to warm up my system, how I was able to get something that I was able to work with. And if there are some important lessons that I take away from this time where I was warming up the system, building a pipeline, I think I cannot overemphasize the importance of reading. By reading a lot of the literature during that time, I was able, up to this day, to be able to see opportunities to do things a bit differently. So the literature doesn't move that fast, at least in the domain that I work in. And from the reading that I did from that time, I occasionally have to check if anyone has done these things since the last time I read the literature. And based on what I find, then I'm already able to quickly set up a study and be able to quickly identify the relevant literature and get moving. So whatever you do when it comes to academic research, if you are interested in publishing top, you really have to read. You really have to understand the existing literature like the back of your hand. You have to have the most important names and the most important pieces of work and on your fingertips. You have to understand it intimately enough that you will be able to know if you have stumbled upon something significant when you start collecting data or when you hear things from the interviews that you are getting, right? So the more you know about the literature and the more you internalize that, the easier it is for you to identify opportunities to make a very important, meaningful contribution. And also, it's easier for you to become a bit more strategic in terms of what you look for. And sometimes this also helps to give you an appreciation of why certain things have not been done. So, one of the weakest ways, I think, to try to justify a particular piece of research is to argue that it has not been done before. If you really are immersed in a particular strand of literature, then it's usually easier for you to start to discern why this has not been done before. Sometimes it's because it's really not the most interesting thing that you can ask, right? So if you are interested in really finding new, interesting insights, this would not be top of the list. Sometimes it might be down to issues like how difficult it is to get this type of data. So I do research on supply chains, for example, and one of the things that stands out at the moment when people are looking at things like sustainable supply chains and trying to understand exploitation within supply chains is how difficult it is to reach the actors that are upstream of the supply chain. So where the most of the work and most of the exploitation actually happens, it's difficult to get that access. And even if you could get that access, usually it's at an organizational level. It's difficult to get to the individuals who actually suffer this type of exploitation. Even if you could identify them, sometimes they're not willing to talk. So as a result, one of the things that I don't expect I will see anytime soon is someone saying, oh, we are going to do this because no one has done it before. Yeah, there's a good reason. It's really difficult to get to it. But if you were the first, let's say, to be able to get to the people that are difficult to reach, then while it's a nice argument that you are the first person to do it, it's always more important to show why we will be better off having access to this particular audience, right? So if we learn something new that we previously could not have learned, then this is a valuable contribution. This is a valid argument for why you will do something that no one has done before. So understanding these things also becomes very, very important in terms of how you set up your own research. And then there are things that you will try, but you should also always be willing to redirect efforts if things don't work out, especially when you are on a tight timeline. So if you're doing your master's dissertation or you're doing your PhD, you are on the clock literally. there will be a time where you have to say, okay, I'm going to stop pursuing this particular ambition. I'm going to settle for this. And this is how I'm going to do it in such a way that it is good enough for me to be able to get somewhere, to at least get my system started and to learn something from that process before I then proceed to go on and do something different. So it's a lot of work, it's a lot of trial and error, but the more you actually internalize in terms of the knowledge that is required, the better that it is going, the better it's going to be for you in terms of getting your stuff published. So this is one thing that I think is also very important and something that will be worth considering when it comes to being able to publish top. Another thing then that I was going to talk about is collaborators. So at this point in my career, I have made 5 top publications. By top, I mean they're in tier 4, which is the highest within the discipline that I work in. I work in operations and supply chain management, and we rely on the ABS list that tells you which journals are most important. So within that, we have 4 tiers. You have 1 point journals, 2 points. So these are the lower ones. 3 and 4 is extremely good, but within 4, we also have a higher level tier that we call 4-star. So I have made 2 4-star publications. That's as high as you will go. And I have made 3 at least 4 point publications. So that's 5 top publications that I've been able to make. And one of the big reasons is that I have been able to find great collaborators to work with. So it's always important to understand that there will be a lot about the academic publishing process that is so difficult, and there are some parts that are so deeply specialized that it's rare to find individuals who excel across all the dimensions in terms of what it takes for you to publish in a top journal. So if I think about my own capabilities when it comes to the academic publishing process, I think I have become more of a method specialist. So where people work with qualitative methods and they're doing exploratory work, this is my biggest strength when it comes to poking holes in the literature and looking at what is happening with the current state of knowledge. Where are the opportunities for us to really deepen the knowledge and to get better insights? This is what I'm also good at. I am a very bad starter. So usually if it depends on me to start something, it may never start, or it will start, but it will not be a smooth start. So I usually will surround myself with people who are really capable of that. But what it also does is that it makes me accountable to other people other than myself. So if I were to rely on myself to get things done, especially now that I'm actually working in academia, my PhD is done. No one is chasing me up to see if I've actually made the publications that I planned to do. And if I were left to my own vices, I would be an unmitigated mess. It would be like nothing ever happens. So for me, collaboration is a space where I become accountable to other people other than myself. It's also a place where I can tap into the strengths of other people, and I'm able to move things along a bit quicker than I would if I had to do everything by myself. And it's also a space where I can really focus more on the things that I know I'm extremely good at, right? So I can be able to look at the method section and say, at least with this version, we are not going to get a desk reject. And at least with this version, at least the majority of the reviewers are going to be willing to give us a chance to revise and resubmit. This is what I do. And then I leave the other specialisms to the other people. So some people are really good at the discussion section. I've worked with someone who's like, they it's amazing like how much they can cut through all the fluff at the back end of a paper and really pull out the things that are important. And they like to say you need 3 or 4 big messages, not more. Like if you insist on it, maybe have 4, but that is all. So usually when you are done, you're at the back end of the research process, you might be able to list 13 things that are all relevant and they are amazing. But then you have to be able to create a hierarchy of relevance, and you have to dedicate most of the word space to those things that count the most. So through working with this person, I'm also learning to detach myself from the other contributions that are valid but are not as significant as the ones that would make people actually stop and pay attention. So through working with other people, I'm actually learning a lot. I'm getting better in terms of managing myself, but I know I still would be an unmitigated mess if I didn't have collaborators. So it has helped me a lot to have collaborators. It has helped me a lot to have a wide range of collaborators. Some of my collaborators are extremely experienced people, so they're valuable when it comes to getting something in shape enough to be able to avoid a desk rejection. But I also do work with fellow early career researchers, so people who are also trying to get published and also trying to get published in top journals, because we share essentially the same interests. We all want to publish top, and we would rather do it sooner rather than later. So we make it a priority. We carve out the time for us to be able to do those things. And so at the end of the day, it also becomes important that your collaborators are varied enough that you can actually manage the different needs and the different expectations and even the different constraints that people face throughout their career trajectories. So, although we like working with professors a lot, I'm learning fast that professors sometimes have the least amount of time available to actually meaningfully contribute to certain pieces of work because they have a lot of stuff going on. They start to do service, which I didn't even know was a thing, but it is a thing in academia, right? And before you know it, they're buried in admin and other leadership roles that just pull them away from doing actual research. Whereas a lot of people like me who will be at the foundations might have a bit more time because the expectations in terms of being of service are much lower. So this has also helped me a lot. And something that I would also say becomes increasingly important, especially in the era of AI, is that you have to collaborate with people that you trust and that you can trust. So there was a time when I could have been willing to, if somebody would contact me out of the blue and say, hey, I'm working on this topic and I know that you are great on methods and I need someone to help me to shape this up. Would you be willing to collaborate with me? I probably, for most of the part, would have said yes. But now, because a lot is happening in terms of how people abuse AI, how they increasingly are able to actually manipulate data or increasingly are able to create data out of thin air. If something happens and you are implicated as a co-author, it's going to also affect your entire record. So as a result, you do have to carefully vet the people that you work with. And for the people that you work with, it's also nice sometimes to have the conversations candidly, like, are you a user of AI when it comes to academic research? How are you using it? And you have to determine for yourself if those uses are acceptable in terms of what you will be comfortable with, because if not, then you're better off just parting ways. There will be many other collaborations that you can do, there will be many other papers that you can write, so you don't have to. I think any moment something feels uncomfortable for you, you should speak up. And any moment it feels like it's a red line for you, you should walk out. You will be fine. There will be other things that you are able to find. And then also related to the use of AI, I also would say make sure before you even collect data, or if you have already and you're now getting into the write up stage, also make sure that you know the AI policies of the journals that you are targeting. So a lot of the journals that we work with now also are spending a lot of time revisiting their AI policies, and it's based on lessons learned over the last couple of years. It means that they may or may not be willing to accept certain practices associated with AI, and more, they want people to make explicit declarations about what they have or have not done when it comes to using AI. So before you do a lot of important work and potentially you lose it because you actually didn't pay attention to what was needed, make sure that you really check what happens with the AI policies of these top journals, what they find acceptable and unacceptable uses of AI, and then make sure that your practices align with the things that they are interested in. If you don't do that, then you might find that you have quite a lot of problems that might mean that you are already not even able to submit in a top journal because you did a series of violations upfront in terms of how you were using these AI tools. So while we have an almost endless number of pieces of advice related to how you can use AI in academic writing. I think the most important indicators of whether those writings or those practices are acceptable is for you to consult the top journals of your field, go through their AI policies, and see if there is anything that comes out that is contrary to what you are being sold in terms of what you can do with these tools. I know for a fact that in my discipline, there is no journal that is going to accept a statement that says that I used AI to identify the gaps in the literature. No one would accept that. So as a result, I still do my literature reviews the old school way. It's still something that I find to be incredibly valuable because it also means that I'm collecting Legos, right? So over my career, I gather bits of information that will become useful at different times, and I can reconfigure this knowledge to create new things as I go along. And so as a result, it's something that I don't see as a burden. It's something that I see as an investment. It's an investment that pays off pretty big, right? So at this point in my life, I'm probably able to generate one 4 point publication once a year. And a huge part of it is because I understand the literature that I am working with, and I'm able to say with confidence and convincingly that what I present is new. And as a result, it's become much, much easier at this stage in my career. But the time between my first top publication and my second top publication could have been something like 7 years or something like that, right? So it looked like nothing was happening. But after that, my system was warmed up, and then I'm able once a year at least to produce something that's going to be valuable. If I get unlucky, once every 2 years, and that's still extremely good because some of the journals that I've been able to publish in, or at least the particular four-star journal that I've been able to publish in, there are full professors in my discipline who may not be able to ever publish there in a lifetime. So that's a good place to be, and that's a place that I'm happy to stay in. So the quality of your work is always going to be much more important than the quantity of your work. Always think about what it means, because increasingly also, because of all the fluff that we're able to generate with these AI tools, your publication count might actually bring even undue attention on you. How are you able to publish 40 papers in 1 year? Because if you actually did the work, we would be very suspicious that you were able to be that productive. But if you're able to consistently hit the top journals, even if you're at a rate of 1 or 2 publications per year, you're doing extremely better than someone who has 40 publications in journals that may not even be ranked, or they're on the 1 star end. So this is an investment that you have to think about. But also, having said that, I would say not all work needs to go in top journals. So I do have work in lower ranked journals, and there were several practical considerations behind that. Some of it was just that I would not be able to gather enough data to be able to hit a top journal, but the idea was important enough, and I thought the work was rigorous enough that I would rather lay claim on this idea, show that I was a forerunner of this particular line of reasoning, and put it in a decent enough journal than try to spend more time collecting more data that might even be an invasive thing to do. So if it's not achievable, then I'm usually very happy to already quite early in the process say, I'm going to go lower, and I'm still going to do decent work, because at least this is something that people can find when they finally catch up to the idea. So that is one thing also that you have to think about. Not all your publications need to be top, and there will be some very pragmatic, very practical reasons why you will take otherwise promising work into lower ranked journals, including, for me, the most important one, that I can lay claim to an idea, that I can say I was a forerunner of this particular thing, even though right now I'm not able to gather the data that allows me to show that. I will come back for a round 2, and I will collect the data, and I will hit top, and I can refer to the earlier work, so that I don't have to spend a lot of word space focusing on the things that I didn't do before. So this will be that, I think, in terms of, the types of things that I have done. And also, one of the things that I also would recommend is that whenever you are developing a paper for a top journal, just try to test it in different ways. So for me, going to conferences, the first paper usually that I'm going to write is a conference paper, or I will write a conference abstract and then I'm going to go and present that in a conference. You're going to get the feedback that gives you a sense of how valuable this work is. And sometimes you're going to get some constructive criticism that will help you to develop your ideas further. So I don't have to have completed data collection at the time that I present something to a conference, because this allows me to actually make some changes in the process before everything is complete. So I always would value the idea of going to conferences to take my work there before I try to write it for a journal, because it gives me some indication of how high I can aim in terms of trying to publish. Seminars are also a good place if you're a PhD student and you're in an institution where they frequently run seminars. Do present in those seminars, do invite people for feedback, and then use that feedback to try to improve the paper. And then after that, once you've understood the shortcomings, once you've understood what sort of criticisms you might get and which ones you're able to address, then you can make a decision about how high you will go in terms of the journal that you're going to aim for. And then the writing process then starts again. So I'm usually going to have multiple versions of a particular manuscript, because I start in the early phases where I'm testing out the idea and trying to see how peers receive that idea. And I'm also looking to them for feedback in terms of strengthening it. And then after that, when I start writing for the peer review process, then I'm going to be focused on particular things that already address a particular target journal, right? So if I think it's strong enough to hit top, I always go for top. If I know deep down that it's not going to hit top, I'm not going to waste the precious time of reviewers who do this work for free. I'm going to already go for the next best journal based on what I understand to be the fundamental restrictions and limitations that I have in terms of that piece of work. So you don't go around wasting people's time. You actually have to really understand what your work is worth, and try to sell it at that value, because otherwise you risk losing a lot of precious time and wasting a lot of resource and effort in trying to get work where it doesn't belong, because people will still pick up on those shortcomings and they're still going to call them out, and then it's going to take you back several, sometimes even years, because the peer review process can be 2+ years. So in my discipline, if I think about, again, the topmost journal, you are looking at roughly a timeline of 2 years from the first submission to when the paper is finally published. So you don't want to go through that only to be told it's not going to fly, we're not going to accept it, because now you're 2 years behind schedule in terms of getting it out. So this is how I also would think about things and say, now that I know what it is worth, I'm very specific about the journal. I'm going to read the requirements before I start developing the draft. Some of the journals are quite prescriptive. They will tell you exactly how to structure your abstract, for example, and how many words maximum you can have for the abstract. They will give you some guidelines in terms of tables and figures, like all those things. I'm going to make sure that I have the information and I'm running a checklist. And first, yes, I'm going to develop a complete thing. It's usually going to be almost double the allowed word count, but it's complete. It tells a complete story. And then after that, I start going through the process of cutting things out. And this is where collaborators also become important, because I know that one of my problems is that I get so attached to the text that I write. Sometimes it's a particular phrase, or it's a sentence, or it's a paragraph, and I really don't want to let it go, because I went through such great effort to write it, or I was feeling like a kind of high when I was writing it. I was like, yes, this is amazing. So I usually invite my collaborators to kill my darlings, because I cannot do it myself. And then I just look at the version with all the fluff taken out. Most times it's like, it's okay. Once in a while, I might be stubborn and say, no, you need to put that back in because this is how it is significant. But I'm learning how to negotiate that. I think also with collaborators, you also have to accept that there's going to be naturally sometimes some kind of friction, because you will have different working styles. You will have different ways of looking at a particular concept or thinking about what the fundamentals are, and you're going to have to pick your battles. So personally, I will fight with collaborators over fundamentals. Like if I think this is a fundamental thing and we need to get it right, then I'm willing to fight for as long as it takes until we reach a level of agreement that is comfortable. and acceptable to all of us. If it's a stylistic thing, like, I don't know, I have this pet peeve. I don't remember what it is, but there's a particular phrase that when people use it, I'm losing my mind, right? And it's a common way of writing. People do it all the time. It's just about the natural evolution of language, but I can't remember what that phrase is. And when people use it as such, when they start a sentence with as such to mean therefore, I'm like, no, as such doesn't mean therefore. But well, language evolved. Apparently it is a thing now. I'm not going to fight people over that. I might just let them know that, something feels itchy in me if that thing is there. But if they want to keep it, it's fine. It's nothing fundamental. It's a stylistic thing. And I think always, especially the first author, should be able to identify themselves or in the work that is written. You should see yourself as an author reflected in a manuscript that is written. So when I'm first author, we are not using as such to mean therefore, but I have collaborators who do it, and when they're first author and they insist on it, then we're going to let it go. We're not going to dwell on it. So this has helped me also, like, to have this hierarchy of what sort of fights am I going to have and what sort of things am I going to let go, because not every fight is worth it, but some fights are definitely worth having. And when you have good collaborators, everyone will understand and everyone will accept that. And so these are some of the things that for me are very important. And so this is that. Then the final piece that I would like to cover, I feel myself rushing through this now. Maybe it's worth also just breaking these things down. There's the issue of how I manage a pipeline. So this is now very simple for me to describe, but it's something that took me probably as long as my PhD took to get this particular system of working. So I'm probably at around year 9, shortly after I obtain my PhD, that I really get the system right. So there's always ideas that are going to be coming through. Some of them are inspired by a piece of work that I just finished, and I realized that, you know what, it would have been interesting to explore this, but there wasn't enough scope, or I didn't have enough data to be able to do it. So such ideas I always put in what I call a parking lot. So I have 3 tiers of managing my pipeline. The parking lot is stuff that is just sitting there, and I hope that one day eventually I will get to it. And then, so whenever ideas come across, I am going to park them in the parking lot. Some of my parking lot ideas come from data that I've analyzed. So whenever I analyze data again, I never do automatic coding. In fact, I have actually reverted to using Excel for a lot of my data analysis. I'm going to read every sentence in every transcript that I have looked at, and I'm going to highlight the most important things. And when I get them out, usually from that Excel file, I'm able to see that certain themes are quite dense in terms of data, right? There's so much data on it that I can write a really amazing paper on it. I will get the depth of insights rather than the breadth, because the depth is always important. And then some things, it's like they are insights, but they could be insights, but they're so scattered and they're so thin that it would be difficult to show convincingly that there's a case. So whenever it's like that, I'm thinking, oh, if I had enough data, this would be a very great area to explore. So those ideas also go in my parking lot. It's like whenever I get the opportunity and I can collect the data, then I'm going to be able to revisit this and I'm going to be able to do something with it. So parking lot ideas, they come from all kinds of places, but I have them, they're sitting there. And then what I usually do is that in the best of times, this is the best of times, I have learned that I can manage something like 3 projects at once. So I have one main project. This is the one that I'm trying to get out next. This main project gets the priority. Like if I'm working with collaborators and they come back with feedback, I put everything down, I pick that up, I start working on it. Then I have 2 back burner projects. So the back burner projects are the projects that I'm going to pick up if, for example, I've sent work out to other collaborators, or I am trying to figure something out. I got stuck in my thinking and I'm like, okay, let me put this aside while I just do something else. Maybe when I come back with fresh eyes, I'm going to be able to do it. And then when the main piece of work is done, when the main projects get submitted to a journal, then one of the 2 back burner projects becomes the one that I pick up and it becomes the main project. And then After that, these back burner projects, it means that I can pick something from the parking lot and add it to the back burner list. So this is what I have. Things move from being in the parking lot to, if they're selected, in the back burner. So whenever I have a bit of time, I'm going to do a bit of work on it. I might review the literature, I might analyze some data, I might conduct some interviews, but it's just doing small things just to keep it moving. And then I have the main project. This is like the thing that I have to be getting out. So if you ask me at any given time, what's your main project, I should be able to tell you this is the main focus of the moment. And when this is done, one of these two things should be able to come forward and I'm able to move it. But this is for the projects that I lead. So where I am leader, this is the system that I maintain. Where I'm a co-collaborator, but I'm not leading a project, then I try to be a responsible collaborator. If people tell me, expect to get this at this time, then I also have to carve out the time to be able to do my part and return things as they are needed. So collaboration also means that I can actually be spinning multiple plates at once, but without necessarily being the one doing the bulk of the work on all the projects. And they do move along and they do get done. So this is one of the things that has helped me a lot. And I think one of the realizations that I'm slowly coming to since picking this up is that there will be some projects that will never leave the parking lot. Because if I think about time as a resource and I think about the investment in terms of collecting the data, in terms of doing justice to a particular topic, I may just never have enough time. Maybe if I got a big research grant and I could get me 5 PhD students, some of that would be done. But also at the same time, I think I would face the challenge that I believe that a PhD student should pick a topic that they care about and they should work on a problem that is important to them. So as a result, I'm not in the habit of handing out PhD topics. I would like to know what is it that somebody is passionate about, that they are so deeply interested in, that they can see themselves spending 3, 4, 5 years working on, and how can I be part of that journey so that I can support them. So my parking lot has been growing a lot, which is, I suppose, inevitable, and I should have seen it coming. And it might be that I'm going to have to come to a point where I sit down and I kill my darlings in the parking lot. Like, say, fare thee well, idea that never saw the light of day. I don't think I'm ever going to do this, but it would have been nice. And then that's how I'm going to do it. So keeping a system running through this for me has been very helpful. And that's how, if I look at individual pieces of work, they take a lot of years for me to develop. It's going to be a lot of years from when I had the initial idea to when I get something published. The shortest that I have made in terms of a 4 point publication maybe has been something like 18 months or 2 years. 2 years, actually, I think. So 2 years is the shortest that I've had from forming an idea to getting something published. It's just recently gotten accepted. It's going to go live soon. But part of it is one, yeah, I've gotten the experience now, so I know like how to manage what I do with the literature review, how I find the right collaborators, how we split the work, how we engage, what we fight about. Learning all those things has meant that now the time span is shorter for me from the time I form an idea to the time that I get something published, but it's still going to be years in the making. And then when you look at my publication count, I'm getting something like one paper, at least one really good paper out a year. And it looks like I'm doing a lot, but it's because I have a pipeline and I have a system. And so from this pipeline, it looks like, oh, I'm doing a lot every year, but a lot of the work is years in the making. It's going to be years before it sees the light of day. So also make sure that you always know, what do you have in the pipeline? What are your parking lot ideas, the ideas that you would like to get to ideally at a certain point? Have some kind of decision rule for how you pick things from the parking lot. Sometimes it also can be things like, there's a special issue on this, and I had this idea in the parking lot. This is actually the necessary pressure that I needed to be able to move this idea along. So because of the special issue call, I'm going to pull that from the parking lot and I'm going to start working on it. Sometimes it's that, okay, I have more time than I've had in a while to focus on research. This was an important piece of work that was always going to be time intensive. So I'm going to pick it from the parking lot and I'm going to work on it. Sometimes it's about where are my collaborators time wise, right? So if I work with collaborators on a particular project and they're all telling me, oh, we're having such a difficult year, there's hardly time for research, no point in pulling that thing out of the parking lot, because at a certain moment it's just going to stay on the back burner and then it's just going to slide back, and all the effort that you have put into it gets lost. And I have a lot of projects like that. I have a lot of projects that I just kept picking up and putting down, picking up and putting down, to the point that all the time, if I think about all the time that I put into those projects, it's a bit sad that in the end we really couldn't push them through. So this system of parking lot back burner main project has helped me as a workaround to making sure that I keep things moving, and that once I dedicate time to something, I'm going to be able to see it through. Unless I know that I have the resource and the time and the space, I'm no longer pulling things out of the parking lot and trying to work on them. So I try to be responsible for the projects that I lead within my collaborative space, and I try to be a responsible collaborator where others are leading, and make sure that I deliver what they ask for and what they expect in the time that is needed to keep things moving. So this is that, and I am going to stop to see if there are any questions. A hidden mathematical genius within. Hello, I forgot your name. I don't know why it's showing me these names. Valuable insights. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm late. Simon, it's always better late than never. So we are good to see you here. Serious passion in writing demonstrated here. Oh, thank you so much. I love your approach of writing a paper. This is building a powerful stamina in publishing. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that is also going to be so absolutely liberating with all my research papers. I want to be able to go to sleep once they're published knowing, yes, I did the best that I could. There could be mistakes in my publication. It's something that I'm open to. But then, given the process that I go through, how rigorous and how transparent it is, it should be possible for people to trace back any errors that I have made. It should also be possible for people to see the flaws in my thinking that will allow them to take that work and push it forward in order to improve the state of knowledge. And I am so intimately involved in the processes that, again, if I were to discuss what the limitations were, this is something that I'm also always very capable of doing, because I think this is where the most important things are when it comes to academic research. So it's not just about creating knowledge, but it's also about understanding the limitations of that knowledge. Like, in what ways is what I have just done limited? In what ways is it possible to improve upon it, so that we can consistently push the boundaries of knowledge? We can consistently improve the state of knowledge, leading to something that's going to be of much greater value. So a lot of the work that I do does have a direct social impact. So if I'm not doing research on humanitarian operations, I'm doing research on public procurement, or I'm doing research on marginalized groups. Like, all those things socially are so important that it's such a huge responsibility to put work out there, because it's going to impact the lives of a lot of people, and those people are already starting at a fairly disadvantaged point. So you want to do your best work so that we do not fall victim, as we repeatedly do, to good intentions. Oh, my intention was to do this nice thing, yes, but the effect was that this is what happened. And when I know I've done my best, it's something that I can live with. And I think it also makes me more open to the criticism of my work, right? So if I'm an anonymous reviewer and someone is shooting down what I did, I have to stop and say, here they have a fair point. So I'm not going to push back just so that my ideas live on. Ideally, people should be able to push back on those ideas, and they should be able to give something back that allows us to keep it moving and to improve the state of everything. I think that the absence of rigor is because of those who mentored us here in Africa, especially in Cameroon. Oh, hello, greetings. How are things? I hope to visit Cameroon one day. They don't care about the writing process. I appreciate all this sound teaching from you. Yeah, I think some of it, I don't know. Maybe people do stop caring at a certain point, but we talk a lot about publish or perish all the time. And I think I will be one of the first people to acknowledge that for whatever reason, I've had a ridiculously privileged life when it comes to academic publishing, and the people around me were patient enough when it came to getting my work out. And I think I'm also in a discipline where people really don't care about your publication counts. They care more about where you get published. So this has actually given me a lot of room to focus more on the quality. And that also has also meant that I really have to understand what I'm doing. I really have to understand the intricacies of the different parts of a manuscript and how those things come together, and the back and forth that is involved as you try to develop something that is coherent and consistent and making a lot of valuable contributions. So in this instance, I think I have no illusions about the amount of privilege that I have had. But at the same time, I do also hope that a lot of people will start to realize that, first of all, if we are doing academic research, scientific research, it's such important work because it can have such a major impact on people's lives. And then secondly, we are really trying to improve the state of knowledge. We do our part, however small that part is, as long as we get somewhere else, this is going to be better. And we do have a responsibility not to trash the place. So right now, thanks to AI, we have an explosion in publications, and it gets even harder now to find that quality knowledge that we can build upon to push even further the quality of that existing knowledge. And as a result, one of the implications of this is that we are making wholesale rejections of journals. So if you're an early career researcher, it becomes more important now where you publish, because there are journals now that people will not consider at all. Not because everything in there is trash, but because enough trash is in there that they're not going to go through the trouble of manually sorting through and getting to your work that was legitimate, that was the result of a lot of blood and sweat, that was the result of actually sincere, genuine, engaged processes. Once it's in that journal, it's lost to the world, because we just have to have ways of simplifying how we find important work. And so the biggest winners in the end is the very same top journals that we have been trying to push against. I think until the advent of AI, there was healthy enough competition to keep the top journals on their toes. Any journal that actually put in the work was able to rise up and maybe eventually overtake those important journals. But now we've just created a scenario whereby smaller journals may continue to struggle because of all the issues that we are having with determining quality work. Like, we have a sea of what I call superficial blah. It's like just blah. You don't even know what you are reading. It could be about anything. It's not so specific. And we are having this intellectual hocus pocus where people just make these predictions that come across as random, at least for the people that will do the involved work. So it's a tough one, and it's one thing that just adds layer to a system, a layer of complexity to a system that was already broken in many ways, and a system that is already in very desperate need of rehabilitation. Now it's just way worse, and I don't know how we're gonna get out of it. So let's hope that there's gonna be something that comes out of it. Okay, I'm gonna answer your question, Samuel, and then I'm going to move on to the topic of how you do a thesis defense. I had thought that I was gonna stay for 1 hour in this live. It looks like it's gonna be slightly longer now. Are we still okay to proceed? Okay, thank you. So you are asking, what is the difference usually between theoretical framework and review of theories in a paper? So your theoretical framework, the best way that I can describe it is it's your so what at the end of a literature review, right? So if you are doing a literature review, as you already mentioned, you are probably looking at, usually we will not add too many theories within the literature review because there's already a limit to what we're looking for, right? So we might be preoccupied with a particular question, and around this question are particular concepts or constructs that we're interested in, and then within these particular concepts or constructs, there are going to be some theories that help us to tease out the most important aspects of it. So the theories on the front end of the paper are just as important on the back end. The theories are explanations. So in terms of what we see right now in a current phenomenon of interest, for example, what existing explanations do we have for what we see? Are they competing explanations? Are they uncontested explanations? Is there something that we might want to look at differently in order to understand this better, in order to improve our explanatory power when it comes to this particular phenomenon? Because the better we are at explaining it, the better we become at predicting it. And the better we become at predicting it, the better we become at making decisions that are going to be of practical relevance, right? So usually within a literature review, although we will focus on a lot of the concepts around the phenomenon of interest, we are also going to pull in some theories that help us to tease this out in terms of the explanations that are in the literature and whether they're sufficient for what is before us. And then when we have done this, then we are going to be systematically deconstructing the ideas in the literature, right? Through the different sections, we are able to show what are the shortcomings in the literature, how do these shortcomings look. So if you would be interested in that, I have 2 literature review videos on my YouTube page right now. One is in 4 ways to find gaps. There are several ways to find gaps, but I think these 4 for me usually are going to lead to the most important contributions to theory, because you try to see where there are contradictions, for example, or where there is some kind of convergence, but this convergence could be problematic. So if you look at these ways of problematizing the literature, then you are able to poke holes in the literature in ways that are going to mean that what you contribute is going to be great. And then your theoretical framework, or sometimes a conceptual framework, is what ties together the shortcomings that you are identifying in the literature, leading to a kind of working, I don't want to use the word hypothesis because it might trigger certain expectations, but in a way it is a hypothesis. It's like your best guess of what the key issues are. So what are the most relevant constructs that are related to this particular problem, and how might they be related? So that relationship is the gateway to the sort of new explanations that you are going to offer as part of your own research process. So always think theoretical framework is the outcome of your literature review. It's the so what to your literature review. It gives us an overview of the key constructs, or the key theoretical constructs that you are interested in, how they might be related, and therefore what you're going to explore as part of your own research process. So if you do this, then you know that, okay, I will have to review theories or concepts or specific things in the literature leading to the theoretical framework, leading to sometimes the conceptual framework. And then this is what is going to guide my research process. This is what is going to inform what if I'm going to collect primary data, for example, it's going to inform what sort of data I'm going to collect, how exploratory the research is going to be, for example, and what the relationship between my work and the existing theory is going to be. So what's the research logic that I'm pursuing here, and how much is open to exploration based on the framework that I have pulled together based on my understanding of the shortcomings of the literature, in relation to the phenomenon of interest. So thank you so much for this. I'm going to close this now because I see that there are no more questions, and then I'm going to talk about the thesis defense, because I get a lot of questions on this. When the live is ready for processing, I'm going to cut this out, and then we are going to publish it as a separate video for another time. But this discussion that I had over the last hour about my research process and how I'm able to publish in top journals, this is going to stay on. You can always follow that. But if you want to answers about the thesis defense and you want them now, then you please do stay on, because it could be weeks or even a month before this part is published as a YouTube video. So let's talk about the thesis